Two visionary initiatives by the Heritage Foundation stand at the forefront of shaping America's future: Mandate for Leadership, providing the blueprint, and Project 2025, driving its implementation. This documentary draws inspiration from the book Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise, published by the Heritage Foundation.
Particularly for the case of the United States, academic scholarship usually is not the most conventional or frequent way in which specific ideological or theoretical trends are able to go up to the public opinion scenario or to the institutions. Why? Because most recently, particularly when it comes to academia, it looks like the institutional way in which the education system, higher education system in special, has endured some topics, some political topics in the American society, has been distorted and take a turn from maybe the most conventional, original, constitutive traditions of the same educational system. It has been more like the civil society of the United States, and particularly the role of specific intellectuals and public speakers in the civil society in the United States, plus many other stakeholders of the civil society of the United States, those who have raised attention about the direction of the country over the last years and have been able to try to make sure that such type of claims, requests, a different approach to the way in which the society should evolve has found resonance on the case in this report from the Heritage Foundation. The same Heritage Foundation itself, being a conservative think tank of the American society, has been able to get much more acquainted with the state of the political situation of the United States and the government, and have finally come up with this report, which is definitively not just the standard view of the majority of the institutional academia in the case of the United States, but definitively involves scholarship qualities that are very much of high importance for the future of the country. The very origin or the original approach of the report itself entails a very different perspective as regards other reports or publications, even from the case of the Heritage Foundation. Despite the fact that the idea of the mandate for liberty, or the idea of the mandate, or the idea of assessing the role and the future of leadership in the case of the United States is a conventional approach that is part historically from the publications of the Heritage Foundation. However, it is clear that, particularly for the case of the upcoming presidency of Donald Trump, it was much more clear for the Heritage Foundation that the possibility of finding resonance in the upcoming president was much more open than during the first administration of Trump. And some people have been able to try to compare the current report with some former reports that were inspired and work hand in hand in the administration of Ronald Reagan. So for the first time in many years, it looks like a huge part of the conservative establishment in the country, or the civil society establishment in the country, through the Heritage Foundation, has found the capacity of identifying resonance in an upcoming political administration, in this case in the figure of Donald Trump, so that they try to align much more the content of the report with the general premises of the program of Trump, despite the fact that Trump himself has claimed that he has nothing to do with the mandate for leadership issued by the Heritage Foundation. But you can see those traces and those very similar premises and quite a similar direction in many of the policies that have been discussed over the last few weeks in the country.
Significant federal budget cuts aim to tackle debt, streamline spending, and eliminate wasteful programs. Plans to curb federal regulation promised streamlined permitting and simpler compliance processes for businesses. Prominently lower taxes simplify the code, enhancing economic efficiency for businesses and individuals alike. Domestic energy policies prioritize oil, gas, and coal, aiming for self-reliance through deregulation and export increases. Federal Reserve reforms focus on inflation control, ensuring economic stability for today and tomorrow. Streamlining agencies transfers roles to states, promoting local governance and efficient decision-making. New rules for hiring and firing aim to improve federal workforce efficiency and adaptability. Federal workforce reductions emphasize consolidation, outsourcing, and private sector partnerships. Streamlined regulations and rulemaking promised better governance and reduced bureaucratic backlogs. Enhanced oversight ensures agencies operate efficiently with transparency. School choice expansions and parental rights form the pillars of new education policy. Medicare and Medicaid overhauls enhance transparency, affordability, and market-driven innovation. Stricter border enforcement and revised visa programs strengthen national sovereignty. Support for law enforcement focuses on reforming sentencing, crime prevention, and drug rehabilitation policies. Policy changes promote traditional families and revamp welfare, adoption, and tax support systems.
From an entirely historical and systemic perspective, I believe such type of approach is at the center of the constitutive premises both of the United States as well as any other either contemporary or previous social system. Now, in the case particularly of the United States, it looks like, unfortunately, over the last few decades, it has been the conservative establishment and the civil society the one that have to defend the role of the family against the increasing intervention of the government. And this is something that even foundationally goes against the tradition of the country, not to mention against the tradition of the Western Hemisphere, and particularly of the main premises of a country like the United States, which is based on the principles of freedom and the most important unity of the way in which societies are able to defend themselves from the increasing influence and power and coercive power of the state is through the unitary family, the traditional family. So it is a little bit paradoxic that it has been required again to put the idea of the family at the forefront of the socio-political environment in a country like the United States, in the middle of a quite huge ideological backlash suffered by the family, led by political actors as well as by the government over the last few years. Now, on that premise, the socioeconomic impact deals precisely going back to the theory of classical liberalism to raise attention to the role of the family on the way in which our contemporary societies are built up in a free market. The family is the original point or stepstone from which the private property as well as the free market is able to evolve in terms of liberty of movement away from the coercive power of the government. And this is not just on the rhetoric. This is the way in which social systems, and particularly free market social systems, have evolved over the last few decades. As far as this premise is somehow embraced by the United States, hand in hand with the mandate of leadership of the report of the Heritage Foundation, I believe a much clearer assessment about the role of the civil society, and particularly the impact of the civil society in the American economy, can take place in the upcoming years, because the origin of value, of any type of value in a market economy, is provided originally from the society, not from the establishment of those politicians in charge, not from the government, and definitively not from the public sector. It is the private sector, the one who is in charge of defining the extent and the direction at which value is created. So I don't know exactly if perhaps the original aims of putting the family first in this new political context of the United States goes hand in hand with the very premises of the free market economy. Unfortunately, not necessarily. Unfortunately, not necessarily, because over the last few years, the role of the family, the role of as an institution, as well as the interaction, the rights and responsibilities of the fathers in relationship with the children, as well as many other institutions, formal and informal institutions of government, trying to colonize the authority of the parents, have been part of the public debate on the country. So if this is the ultimate goal of putting family first, is fine, but definitively the scope at which contemporary social systems are able to evolve, putting the family first, it goes much more far than the specific context in which perhaps this premise is part of the mandate.
Increased defense investment targets equipment, training, and Space Force innovation. America First strategies redefined international relations with focus on allies, China, and Russia. Enhanced borders utilize advanced tech, bolstered staffing, and interstate cooperation. Defensive and workforce growth strategies protect infrastructure against cyber threats. Reorganized intelligence focuses on oversight, efficiency, and integrated decision-making. Policies curbed federal overreach by redefining executive orders and regulations.
The mandate itself does not necessarily explicitly claims constitutional modifications that tend to reinforce extensively the figure of the president, as far as it goes hand in hand with the constitutive traditions or constitutional traditions of the United States as a political system. But the mandate definitively considered of great importance, especially for the role of the government and for the capacity of governance of the person in charge, in this case President Trump, to make sure that some branches of the government are not fully neutral, meaning that partisan actors are able to facilitate and endorse the original intentions and political goals and public policy agendas of the president. Now, this is something natural that goes hand in hand with the concept of institutional liberal democracies in general, despite the fact that some people claim that those in charge in the bureaucracy should not have partisan views. Objectively speaking, however, this is impossible, because every citizen is itself a political actor in a society. And when you have a specific agenda in order to try to implement any type of policy goal, both in the medium or on the long term, you have to count with people in the government who are able not only to understand, but also to embrace and address the direction of the policy that you are willing to implement. Besides, however, in a much more profound perspective about the way in which liberal democracies operate, you have to realize that a big part of the bureaucracies, including professional politicians, rather than serving the interests of the population or the political parties, they tend usually to either represent or feel identified with, serve their own interests. So this is something that, systemically speaking, you cannot avoid. The fact that the mandate openly claims that it is necessary in some branches of government to make sure that there is partisan workforce that works hand in hand with the central government, I think is just a rational, coherent approach of the way in which societies, modern societies, or even liberal democracies should operate. And particularly when it comes to assess the extent at which some bureaucratic actors have been so much disconnected from the civil society over the last few decades, you end up realizing that this is a necessity.
Empowered states lead reforms, reinforcing their sovereignty within federal frameworks. Judicial reforms aim to enhance court efficiency and uphold constitutional rights. First and Second Amendment protections are reinforced under revised policies. Mechanisms enhancing checks and balances ensure a transparent, accountable government.
Some of the main policies that are drafted on the mandate definitively go hand in hand with specific political agendas that have been presented, defended, and praised by Donald Trump himself and members appointed to the cabinet of Donald Trump. Donald Trump himself has claimed that he has no relation with the content of the mandate or with the mandate itself, and even in some occasions have said that he has not even checked the content of the mandate. For tactical reasons, this makes sense, as far as the Heritage Foundation is an independent, non-governmental organization that is not necessarily directly connected with the government of the United States. However, it is clear that there is an ideological and public policy alignment between the Trump campaign, possibly the policies to be implemented during the Trump administration, and the content of the mandate. This cannot take anybody by surprise in general terms, because the Heritage Foundation has been one of the leading conservative think tanks on the country. Now, saying that, it is important also to take into account something. The political direction taken by the country itself, by the United States in the recent years, has not been conventional for a big part of so-called Western democracies, meaning that it has somehow off-railed from a quite normal tendency of assessing public affairs, foreign relations, the economy, the society, and even the values of the country, to enter in quite strange ideological disputes over fields that never have been discussed before. I believe this is a more systemic consequence of the way in which liberal societies have evolved in general. And definitively the United States being the largest country, the most powerful nation that defends Western values cannot be absent from the consequences of this social and cultural dynamic, particularly when a big part of this dynamic finds itself in the middle of ideological dispute that takes place in social networks, for example, and create different informational matrix that distort the way in which public debate takes place in liberal societies, in free societies. I say this because some people claim that necessarily some of these values are strictly conservative, but it's not like that. Many of those values were part of the American society, either conservative or liberal society, even in the case of the United States for many years before, and many of those values are part of a big part of either partisan liberal or conservative political parties on the Western Hemisphere. So they don't necessarily just belong to the members of the society who feel themselves identified with conservative views, but they are just part of the civil society in a big part of the Western Hemisphere. They have been part of that section of the society, and they have been already today endorsed by those that section from big parts of the society, either if they identify themselves with conservative or liberal values.
The 2025 mandate for leadership delivers a bold conservative vision, revolutionizing policy into action, securing America's future.